Okay, it is 12 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. And I know we have a packed program today, so I will keep this introduction short and sweet. We are pleased today to have with us Chase Anderson and Judy Rush. They are from Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, and they will be presenting this ethics CLE credit for us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. My name is Chase Anderson. I'm a case manager at Minnesota's Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. I've been a case manager here for over 8 years. And prior to that, I practiced divorce and family law in Minnesota for about 7 years. And before law school, I counseled teenagers. And I was a child protective social worker, so I may pull from some of my family law experience. I'm going to include my contact information and email along with LCL's basic information in the chat, and I will do that at the end of the program as well. Judy, do you want to do a little intro and then get things rolling?
You bet. Thanks, Chase, and thanks for having us here. My name is Judy Rush. I'm the outreach manager here at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. I joined LCL about 1.5 years ago, after about 20 years of being a volunteer. I've spent my career at the intersection of lawyer assistance, professional responsibility, and legal education. I practiced law. I ran the mentor program at St. Thomas, and am thrilled to be here at St. Thomas and be with so many of you who are here to learn about ethics, negativity, and stress. Welcome.
And I would like to note, as the program is going, feel free to put in comments to the chat, and Judy and I will keep an eye on that as well.
Perfect. So this CLE explores how the negativity that we face as lawyers, our stress, and our ethical duties interact. And our purpose here is to give you some tips on how we as lawyers can more effectively and ethically manage our personal and our professional lives. And although the title of the program includes negativity, and we're definitely going to spend some time recognizing some of the negative aspects of the profession, ultimately, we're, in talking about how it affects us and what we can do about it, ultimately it's a positive program with a positive effect. So thinking about, where does negativity come from? And I would guess that all of you have some ideas about that, and we'll hit a number of these, but I'm interested in you also, thinking about the negative, where these things are coming up in your life. So, as lawyers, we commit most of our time serving other people. We're held to a very high standard, and we hold ourselves to a much higher standard. We're exposed to more than our share of negativity, even in the best of times. And I think we learned in the last few years that it, we thought it was bad before, and then we ended up in a, as Chase will talk about later, we ended up in a great big pot of boiling water. And so, but even even on good days, we're professional pessimists. So, we're there to see the worst things that can happen so that we can effectively deal with them. We're held to a high standard, and we hold ourselves to an even higher standard, that of perfectionism, which is a really high standard to meet. And so many of us walk around worrying about what we did or what we didn't do. We work long, hard hours under a great deal of stress. The people that we serve are themselves very stressed. And, sometimes we, our jobs, definitely don't always fit into a workday. I think there's some lawyers who think that other lawyers might have these work days that magically end at a certain time of the day. But the reality is that for most of us, it doesn't, because when we leave home at the end of the day, that's not the end of our work day, and it's not the end of us giving so much of ourselves to other people. And so sometimes this results in us, laying awake at night, worrying about problems that we need to solve the next day. And it has a dramatic impact on our personal and professional lives, and just wears us out. Maybe we begin to worry about or be concerned about our career choices. Chase?
Yeah, so I oftentimes talk about stress for lawyers. And it's kind of a pot of boiling water. Yeah, and I'll get into it, but in general, you can go ahead, Judy, with those. The mental health and substance use issues among practicing attorneys is about double that than the general population. And we have long hours, billable hour requirements, demanding trauma-heavy practice areas, relationships that we have to navigate, whether it's work relationships or our relationships at home, children, financial issues, internal and external expectations, whether that's, I think I need to do this for this case, or get this result, or make this amount of money annual, this salary annually, or senior partners expecting me to hit so-and-so goals. And then you have life stuff, births and deaths and marriages and divorce. And all of that really starts to crank up the temperature. And oftentimes it's a slow boil and you don't really realize it because you're just kind of going on with your day. But then by the time you know it, you might be floating around at the top of that pot, and one little thing could happen, and whether you stub your toe on your kid's toy, or you get in a little fender bender, or you don't see eye to eye with opposing counsel, and it could just spill over. So what we want to do today is talk about how these stressors can ethically impact our practices, and more importantly, how we can proactively work on lowering that boiling water to a manageable level, so that when those life and those professional things do happen, maybe it boils up a little bit, but then we can bring it back down. And also sources of negativity that we've all experienced over the last few years. The pandemic has changed our lives forever. Before 2020, I didn't know what Zoom was, and I didn't have a webcam. And now I'm talking to over 200 of you through this little camera on my screen. This has also, there's also been a lot of political and judicial strife. People looking to us because we are lawyers, saying, can they do that? Is this legal? What do you think on this? And if you're not specializing in that area, you might not know, but you still have people looking to you for answers, whether it's neighbors or relatives. Social and racial inequalities and injustices have really been had come to the forefront over the last few years. Economic downturn, and it seems like that's kind of making a change for the positive, but that's still lingering. Social media and disinformation coming from all sides, trying to sort through that with how you navigate your interactions with your neighbors or your clients or your coworkers. And lawyers are on the forefront of all of this. So most of the things that you see on the news that's on Twitter, that's on Facebook, that's on a news website, or maybe you get the paper. Lawyers are oftentimes on the forefront of this, and that can continue to really wrench up that level of water. And keep in mind that you're also working with clients that are dealing with all of these stressors in a lot different ways. So not only are you trying to navigate how this is impacting your life, but also how it's impacting your clients' lives.
And if we think about what goes on in our workplaces, and our workplace is broad. It might be, you might be a solo practitioner. You might work in a government agency. You might work in a large or small firm, or you might not be engaged in the traditional practice of law. And our our workplace includes, you know, the courtroom, the boardroom, and every other place that we're doing what we do. And the reality is that the relationships, our connections, and our interactions within the workplace can be a major source of negativity. And so whether we're being exposed to unfair treatment, explicit or implicit, microaggressions, those words that can sting and make us feel like can other us, you know, whether whether the workplace isn't suitable to your needs, your physical needs, whether you can't be yourself at work. I mean, those are a lot of difficult things that that lawyers tend to experience in the workplace that can really cause, and that's before we start talking about the workload and the, you know, the other things that are just a part of our work. And over time, you know, there's a stress response that occurs with all of these things that is great if it's a stress response that's helping you get, you know, surmount the obstacle and get it done. But over time, those stress chemicals in our body can harm our health.
So how does this affect us as lawyers? So I commented on this earlier. You'll see that this is a study back in 2016, so this is pre-COVID, and it showed that the lawyers had double the rates of mental health, such as depression, anxiety, elevated stress, suicidal thoughts, double that than the general population. And those numbers were even higher for attorneys that were under the age of 30 and or have been practicing 10 years or less. So whether or not you fall into this category, or maybe you're supervising a newer attorney, this can directly impact you as your responsibilities in a supervisory role. So the suicidal thoughts, that number really jumped out at me. I think before this study, we all knew that the practice of law was a very stressful profession, but this really put some teeth behind it. This was a groundbreaking study that really started to open up these discussions on lawyer well-being. And then, so I hope you can see this. So the yellow on the left, that is anxiety. The blue column in the middle, that's depression. And the right on the orange, that's suicidal thoughts. And the three columns on the left, this is attorney levels pre-COVID. And so you see 23, 28, and 11. So I was curious how these three different columns would be affected during COVID. So, and here's the perfectionist in me. I'm taking a look at general population, and it's misspelled and it's driving me a little bonkers, but I'm just going to let it slide. So the three columns on the right are population in general during COVID. So you see the 23 to 30, that's pretty close. The 28 to 26 for depression, that's pretty close, and 11 and 11 for suicidal thoughts, that's spot on. So it's almost as though during COVID, the rest of the world caught up to the levels of lawyers, which, you know, we all know how crazy things were in our society during COVID. That kind of says that's how lawyers live their day in and day out life. And you know dang well that lawyers' levels did not stay the same. So during COVID, you can bet that those numbers increased as well. So I just wanted to do a little bit of a comparison there. And so how does the stress that we deal with in practice affect our lives? We have rule-based morality. We have to follow the ethical rules, whether or not we specifically think that that jives with what we think is right. We still have to follow those rules. Again, those expectations, vicarious trauma. You know, this is in those trauma-intensive practice areas. And I use the example of a personal injury lawyer, where you might be dealing with severe accidents or deaths, and you're looking at photos and dealing with injured clients and deposing, police officers and all of that icky stuff, even though you all are not directly involved in those traumatic events, you're still shouldering that for your clients. And when you do it case by case, week after week, year after year, all of that stuff can get really, really heavy. The competitive nature of practice. I read an article a couple of years ago and it compared the practice of law to surgeons. And imagine you're a really good surgeon and you're, in slicing and dicing and you're doing what you need to do. And in walks an equally skilled surgeon on the other side of your patient. And they start to undo everything that you're doing. You can imagine how stressful that could be. And that in essence is what litigation is. We are the problem solvers. People look to us to solve their problems. And accordingly, sometimes it's hard for lawyers to admit that we have our own challenges, that we have our own problems, because we don't want to appear weak, or that might affect our reputation. And that gets into a lot of the stigma, which is starting to dissolve slowly. But that is one thing that COVID has done, is it's normalized these discussions more. And with the studies that have come out over the last few years, we're really starting to see some progress in these areas. Little value is placed on feelings, only facts. Especially in law school, you take a look at the IRAC analysis, and there's no F for feelings. Oftentimes feelings are just kind of put up on the shelf, and success is defined by others, whether it's your law professor or the judge decides your case, even though you might not agree with it. You can do your best to advocate for them, but ultimately the outcome is oftentimes out of your control. I recall several instances when maybe I won 7 out of 10 issues that I was arguing, but then the client would say, I really wish we would have won these other 2. And then as I'm driving home, I think to myself, what could I have done differently? And it's easy to ignore those successes and really focus on those losses and allow your client's perspective of success to kind of drive you. And pressure, which can be good and it can be bad. So here, I know the bottom left is where there is not a lot of pressure. Your ability to cope is really good. Maybe you're kind of bored, but then things start to ramp up. You start to get more calls, you're assigned more cases. Then the juices start to flow. Then you become creative, and then at the top, you're firing on all cylinders, or you're in the zone. Maybe you're prepping for that final like you did in law school, or you're prepping for that trial. A lot of athletes kind of get there when they're, readying themselves for a road race or wherever that case may be. But then when that pressure starts to really increase and your ability to cope with that becomes too much, you become overloaded and indecisive and irritable and anxious and confused, fatigued and burnt out. And so, going back to my pot of boiling water analogy, when you're up top, you might be floating around this right-hand side level a lot. And you can understand how it might be hard to navigate through a complex case or juggle a lot of things when you're irritable and anxious and exhausted. And that can oftentimes lead to burnout. So I encourage you all to do regular self-check-ins on where you're at on the scale. And if you find yourself more on the left or more on the right than you'd like to be, and I'm guessing more people are going to be more on the right side than on the left. But there are things that you can proactively do to kind of maintain some balance. And consequences of failing to manage that stress appropriately. It can reduce your performance, and that can be personal or professional performance, being there for your family or your neighbors, or your friends. It can lead to mental health and physical health problems. And I'll compare the two a lot throughout today's presentation. It increases the likelihood of using unhealthy coping mechanisms. And if there were mental health or substance use issues to start with, those are oftentimes exacerbated, especially during the pandemic. So after our big groundbreaking study on the rates of mental health and substance use issues, this came out a few years after, and I call it the Now What report. So it identified ways that we as attorneys can better the profession, whether it's lawyer assistance programs or bar associations or professional regulations, big firms, solo practitioners, law schools. So moving along, it starts off the report by saying, to be a good lawyer, one has to be a healthy lawyer. So I think we all out there want to be good lawyers. So ask yourself, do you consider yourself a healthy lawyer? Because the more steps you take to become a healthy lawyer, the better of a lawyer you're going to be. So I like to highlight that in this, and you know, this report's 85 pages long. But if you're curious on what you can do, maybe you want to take some ideas back to your office or your firm, this really has a step-by-step analysis on what you can do in your sphere. Judy, moving on.
And when we start thinking about, you know, what ethical impact does it have, you know, as the Now What report indicates, you know, they're looking at basic competence, right? But one thing to think about is the impact it has on us ethically results both from those relationships in which we're delivering what we need to deliver under the rules of professional conduct, whether or not we get a complaint, right? And so, you know, this slide isn't meant to scare anybody, but it's meant to point out that most ethical complaints filed against lawyers come from their clients. And so it's in that relationship where there is obviously some negativity. And it arises out of the core duties, the ones that were hammered on in law school and are so relevant to any communication or anything that you have ongoing with clients. And so, and that is, you know, Rule 1.1, competence, Rule 1.3, diligence, Rule 1.4, communication, and then sometimes they come out of trust account violations. I think that tends to come in number 4, but consistently it's that 1.1, 1.3, 1.4 combination that results in admonitions. And so 2/3 of complaints that come in against lawyers result in private discipline or private admonitions in recognition of the fact that you know, even good lawyers get complaints, right? You're not a bad lawyer because you got a complaint. And you're not a bad lawyer because maybe you ran afoul of one of these rules. And you know, serious discipline, you know, doesn't necessarily happen because of negativity. Serious discipline tends to result from you know, a whole host of other things. And so focusing on, you know, these core duties and thinking about you know, what is it that that causes the negativity, and then what ultimately we'll talk about what you can do to try to address that. And so you know, we've realized in the last few years that you know, competence in a crisis environment was a whole new animal. As we, you know, we discovered that, you know, it's like drinking water out of a fire hose, and we had to, you know, change everything about how it is we approach the law. And I guess the good news from that is we all discovered what we had within us to be able to do that. The challenge was the negativity, the challenge that existed that causes that stress that can result in that burnout that Chase was talking about. And so, you know, you come into law school with that core group of skills that you need, and as long as you stay abreast of those changes, stay, continue to attend CLEs and educate yourself on what you're doing, you're competent when you got out of law school, and you'll continue to be competent. But at the same time, as things change, as we found out, and as things continue to change, especially on the technology front, there's so much that, aside from that, that need to know what it is we're doing and how to represent clients, we need to think about things like technology and the impact that can have on us, both positive and negative. And so, that comment 8 talks about maintaining requisite knowledge and skill. Keeping abreast of changes in the law is one thing, but also thinking about technology. And so as we think about, especially those who are running their own firms, thinking about data technology, data security, for those in firms, so many of us are working remotely, and what impact does that have? And so that can really be a negative that's just always in the background. And then diligence. So we need to, this is one of my favorite rules, and actually it comes out of a comment that says, that we're required to pursue a matter on behalf of a client in spite of personal inconvenience. And we definitely, as lawyers, know what inconvenience is, right? We need to have commitment, we need to have zeal. And even in normal times, sometimes that can be hard to find when things are so challenging, when the workload is so significant, where the interactions that we might be having in our work are impacting us. And so we can, sort of come away from that, even though, we are competent and we are moving along as best we can move along. Sometimes we encounter a significant amount of negativity. And one thing to think about is what is diligence? What is diligence as technology continues to advance, and we continue to have these wonderful tools that allow us to work from wherever we are and to be reached 24/7. What does it mean to be diligent, to be reasonably diligent and reasonably prompt in a world where people can reach you at any moment?
And I would like to comment on that. If you could go back real quick.
You bet.
I do want to point out that it is not, the rule does not say, lawyer shall act within reasonable diligence according to what the client feels is diligent or prompt. And I know that it's important to have these discussions on the front end of your representation to set realistic expectations about how you're going to communicate with your client moving forward. Because sometimes, and I ran across this all of the time, clients think that you're going to be available 24/7. And that can be a recipe for disaster. So, and moving along, as we're going through the rest of the rules, if you keep in mind that these are just kind of little bullet points on the rules, and if you are coming across issues in any of these areas, I always recommend step 1, go to the rule, read the comments. That is your best guidance on how this might apply in your scenario. Thanks, Judy.
Absolutely, that's good advice. And sometimes it turns out that your instincts are good, and when you take a look at the rule, you realize that you've been doing it the way you should. But keeping that, especially if you can get that free copy of the rules from the Office of Lawyers Professional Responsibility and keep it handy, that there's definitely a benefit to doing that. And so, Rule 1.4, again, so much of the negativity that we deal with in the workplace comes out of the relationships that we have with others. And, Chase's comment about, managing expectations, Rule 1.4 is the hard one. In fact, I think that is actually the one that receives the most complaints pretty consistently. Because that's the one that requires us to be the advisor, the guide, we need to update our client. That's actually, for many people, the reason we do what we do, right? I mean, that interaction with the client. The challenge is, negativity can enter into those communications, whether, perhaps the client is difficult, perhaps the news is bad. I mean, at least half the time, right? Unless, you're in an area where you can always deliver good news to your client, or most of the time it's good news. That can be very difficult, delivering bad news. And there might be, as Chase indicated, your clients are going through some stuff that you are sharing with them. You're experiencing their trauma, but also you have your own. And so there might be things that are causing reactions in you. And so that's, when we're talking about negativity, it's sort of all of those things, not just difficult people, which, I think we think of first. It's all those other reactions that you can have in yourself. And then that, does this rule mean that you're on call all the time? And for many lawyers, it does. I mean, it depends on the setting, or they feel that there's an obligation to do that, or maybe the employer doesn't require it, but it's kind of a wink, yeah, you don't need to do that, but the expectation really is that you do it. And so whether you're on the front line, trying to manage the communication with the client, or you're being held to a standard in a workplace, this rule can cause some challenges. And again, clients can reach you anytime, when and what is reasonable. And I think that just because somebody can reach you doesn't mean that you need to respond immediately. And so, the word reasonable, as we learned in law school, can be very helpful for us in thinking about, what, how do I as a lawyer want to make sure I'm managing this relationship in a positive way, and not feeling like I am always having to immediately respond to whether it's the client or other folks. And obviously there's a hierarchy. When the judge reaches out, that might have a different place in the queue. But thinking especially about managing this client communications is key to managing the negativity. And then confidentiality, I think some folks would think, well, what, confidentiality, how does that breed negativity? But as I'll talk about a little bit later in the program, the connection that we have with others that we can talk to that can relate to what we're going through is a really good way to deal with negativity. This rule 1.6 tells us that, we need to be very circumspect about how we share information. And so, some of those difficult things that happen, many of which are described in rule 1.16, withdrawal, right? Those difficult things, the client's not paying, the client's not communicating, they're treating you badly. There's a lot that can go on that you just can't share. You can't share with others, and being able to share with others is beneficial. Not being able to share can be very frustrating. And the other piece is dealing with unhappy clients. You can't make everyone happy all the time, and having practiced for a long time, over a course of many years, notice that I didn't identify the years at the beginning like Chase does, because he can. Back in the day when a client was unhappy, they called you, maybe they sent you a piece of correspondence that arrived in the mail, maybe they talked to their neighbor, maybe they made an ethics complaint. But that was the way that, that complaint system was harnessed. And now we have whole new technology that allows clients to complain in a different way, very publicly, and without even appropriate boundaries. And that can be very, very difficult. And we have some ability to respond to that. Just as we can seek help. We can talk confidentially to a therapist about things that are going on in our practice. For example, we can't just talk about it at dinner parties or whatever. And we can respond to complaints that clients make against us. So we can defend ourselves, but it's fairly narrow. And so Rule 1.6 says in an actual or potential controversy with a client, you can share information protected by 1.6. And of course, 1.6 protects anything related to the representation. So it's very, very broad. But it needs to be in this context, in an actual or potential controversy, which it's been interpreted in different ways in different jurisdictions, but in Minnesota, it's interpreted very narrowly. And so, you know, it isn't just you're in a bit of a tangle with your client. It needs to be an actual controversy and essentially needs to be in a proceeding. And we need to be careful about how we respond. So, you know, the fact that we have an opinion that talks about, you know, what the limitations are in our responses to public or social media or other public content tells us that lawyers, you know, this is happening out there. And for those of you who've had to deal with that, you know, that it's terrible. It's terrible. And, but we have to be very circumspect. We don't lose our role. You know, we are still fiduciaries. We're still that lawyer who has that duty of confidentiality. And so we need to be very circumspect about what we reveal. But the other thing that, you know, these complaints and attorneys' responses reveal about the lawyers is that sometimes this negativity can cause us to respond in a way that isn't consistent with our ethical being, right? You know, we might, you know, when we're dealing with negativity, we're dealing with large amounts of stress, we might act in a way that goes a little sideways, right? We might respond too much. We might actually actively, you know, engage in social media in ways that that we're venting, right? And so, so in order to, you know, sort of manage the negativity and managing the negativity and managing the stress is critical to be able to effectively manage the natural, you know, you're going to get complaints. People are going to be unhappy with you, but figuring out ways to effectively manage that is important. And so what do you do? I mean, what can we do to effectively and ethically manage negativity? Now, one way is, and I know I'm talking a lot about assuming that people are practicing law, and I know you don't all practice law, but whether you practice law in a traditional sense, or whether you run your own firm, or you work in a larger organization, or maybe your client isn't a traditional client, these things are still relevant. And so, you know, generally, you know, serving others well, whether it's a client or a constituent or a board member or whoever it is that you're serving, you know, serving them well generates positivity just in general. But then if we think about, you know, choosing clients, who we're working with now, you know, as a former solo practitioner, you know, that is key, or a small firm practitioner. If you have the ability to choose who your clients are, that gives you that is a way to really, you know, head off some negativity. But even if you're not, you know, part of the choosing clients is having conversations with them and having conversations about what's reasonable, managing their expectations. What can I do for you and what can I do for you? What am I willing to do, what not? And so being able to sort of meet the clients where they are, and saying no to the ones you can say no to, or knowing you can't say no, you know, how to effectively manage those. You know, be competent, make sure you can do what you need to do for those clients, or get help, you know, be diligent, work on their case, even though it's causing you, you know, it's not the client or the case or the matter that you want to pick up. And then 1.4, communicating. So managing reasonable expectations with clients, as Chase indicated, and I'll say many, many times, you know, letting clients know, you know, what they can expect from you. And that's not just around communication, it's about other things. You know, what is the standard of behavior? Not everybody knows how, you know, naturally comes to how to treat people well. You know, there are people in your, you know, it's not just you, it's all the folks in your office, for example. You know, they're lawyers sometimes, and clients might mistreat others. So expectations about what is the standard, what do you expect of them, what can they expect of you, just it goes a long ways. You know, happy clients don't sue their lawyers, and happy clients don't cause extraordinary negativity to their lawyers either. And so fees, you know, is just another communication issue. But in most cases, it's just, manage expectations of your client, bill them, and then serve them. Don't forget that, you're here to serve them. You are a fiduciary. When things go wrong, for some lawyers, the inclination is to say, well, I'm not going to make your life easy. You fired me or I fired you. I'm not going to make it easy. The reality is you need to make it easy. You're a fiduciary. You still, when things go wrong, you still need to be able to sort of deliver the client as best you can to their next stage.
All right, I'm sorry, but the only way I can deal with stress is by passing it on to others. This might apply to you at home or possibly at work. I just thought that was a little entertaining. But there are other ways to deal with stress. I do want to point out that there was a comment about the OLPR advisory opinion. That's also a good option. And you can get free, confidential advice on ethical situations. And I've included that phone number and the online form page in the chat. So moving forward, things that you can do to proactively lower that pot of boiling water. When you're dealing with a stressful situation, excuse me, focus on what you can control and what you can change. Take a look at the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is you go to court and you have the wrong file and you don't know the facts, and oh, actually you're in the wrong county and you're still wearing your pajamas. That's probably not going to happen. Best case scenario is you're there on time, you know the facts, and you win on every point. So what can you do so when you take a look at best case, worst case scenario, and you're stressed out about a situation, whether it's a trial, mediation, taking a look at that really reins in that spectrum of what to worry about. And then it really gets you to focus on, okay, what can I do to tip things toward the best case scenario? Next slide, please. Also, respect your feelings. They deserve attention. I go to counseling about once a month, and that's how I take care of my mental health. And I try to work out a couple times a week, and that's how I take care of my physical health. And whether or not you're going through a life-changing event and you need to talk to a therapist, proactively think about how you can better your own well-being. We're supposed to eat healthy and exercise so that if we get ill or we get injured, our body is suited to respond to that. So goes for mental health. So recognize that your own feelings, they should not be just ignored. They're important and they deserve attention. So it's so easy for lawyers to just kind of focus on what's next. And these issues oftentimes don't happen overnight. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they just start to build up. And then you take a look back and you're like, how did I get here? And so now you have to reshift. So the more you can proactively think about that, the better. Allow yourself to make mistakes, and allow yourself to make mistakes, and allow yourself to make mistakes. I've had a lot of discussions with law students and lawyers that are so overwhelmed with anxiety about making a mistake in a case that it's going to ruin their reputation or just affect their the future of their practice to a point where that anxiety can be almost it just handcuffs them. We all make mistakes, and if you do make a mistake, try to learn from it, recognize why it happened, take accountability for it, fix it as best as you can, and put things in place so that doesn't happen again. And remember that if you do make a mistake, those are behaviors. That's not because you're a bad person or a bad lawyer. So just as long as you realize it's not a personal flaw, it's a behavior, it makes it easier to get past that and talk to other lawyers that, you know, we all make mistakes. This is all a learning process. Listen to what your body is telling you. Mental health symptoms can manifest in physical ways such as backaches, headaches. I feel it in my shoulders when I get really anxious and I feel like I'm wearing shoulder pads. How is it affecting your appetite or your sleep? And if you're noticing changes in these areas, ask for some support. And come face to face with your problems. This is an opportunity for change and improvement. Try to view challenges as an opportunity to make improvements. Don't sweep those problems underneath your rug. You know, because if you keep on ignoring them and sweeping them underneath the rug, eventually the rug is going to be up toward the ceiling, and it's not going to be. You're not going to have any room to breathe. I had someone pretty close to me had maybe some potential for some health issues, and that person just didn't want to go see the doctor. I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. And it got to a point where it became a very kind of emergency type of situation. So if you're seeing things, whether it's in your, you know, in that scenario, your physical health or your mental health, maybe you're just not as happy as you'd like to be, or maybe you're drinking more than you'd like to be, or maybe you're just feeling like you're kind of in a rut. Talk to someone, and you know, you can call us so that you can start turning the trajectory of it and start writing that path. And oftentimes these problems are hard to see. You know, if I slip and I fall and I twist my ankle, I might be walking around down the hall and Judy will say, Chase, you know, you're limping pretty bad. You should get that looked at. But if I'm dealing with, you know, a severe case of anxiety, that might not be as noticeable to Judy, and it might not be as noticeable to me. So that's why it's important to really do those regular self check-ins, because the mental health piece is sometimes harder to see than the physical health piece. Seek help when it's needed. Getting help and asking for help is a healthy choice. It's a brave choice. And not only ask for help when things are not going the best, ask for help when things are maybe going okay, to proactively lower that pot of boiling water, because life happens to all of us. And the better prepared you are, not only will that help you in your personal and professional life, it'll help you day in and day out be a better attorney and a better spouse and a better parent, but it'll prepare you for when things are really tough. And realize that we always can't get through this on our own. I think sometimes lawyers think, well, I'll just fight my way through it. You know, I've gotten through tougher stuff, but you know, I'm taking a look at my client's problems. My problems aren't as bad as theirs. You know, comparing your issues and your challenges to other people, it's not a fair analysis. If you need help, it's okay to ask for help. And I use this analogy all the time. I was on an airplane over the weekend, and every time this comes up, I get reminded of this. Take that air mask and put it on yourself first, and then you can help those around you. So you, as an attorney, how can you be expected to represent and advocate for your client as best as possible if you're not taking care of yourself first? How can you help your clients and your coworkers, your friends, your family, your community, your neighbors? So it's really important to recognize that if things are challenging, sometimes lawyers think it's greedy or I'm too busy to ask for help. But the amount of time that you take for yourself to improve yourself will be seen tenfold.
Well, and I just, I'm about to start talking a little bit about some well-being approaches to dealing with negativity and stress. But before I do, I wanted to emphasize a couple things that Chase said that just really hit me. And Chase and I have done this together a few times, and you know, it's interesting how different things hit us at different times. But one thing that he said was, things don't necessarily happen overnight, but sometimes they do, right? And that, when we think about negativity and stress, and, the idea is that these things can, they can start to build. So, by themselves, yeah, I should be able to handle this. It's not that big of a deal. But the reality is that these things are cumulative and they can really impact us. But always we're humans. And so we get ill, and we don't get ill because we're not, practicing our well-being well enough, right? I mean, we get ill, and we need to get help because we're humans. And so I just think that's powerful stuff. And all, Chase's advice, Chase's comments about stress are just, stress is so endemic to the profession. So if you take away just a few thoughts from these slides, or go back and look at the slides, because they're accessible to you, think about his advice on dealing with stress, because it's tremendous. And, one thing to think about is, we can't avoid the negativity, but there are ways that we can develop our resilience toward it. And so that's the good news. Resilience, you think about resilience as like being able to bounce back, to recover from things, because we're, it's sort of like, I don't know how old people are, but, it's sort of like our Teflon. Back in the day, the Teflon pans, nothing stuck to it, right? The reality is that, we're not Teflon. We're not, things stick to us, but resilience allows some of the things to slide. It allows us to bounce back even from difficult things. And so, we don't come at it naturally as lawyers. We're about in the 30th percentile in terms of our resilience, which means, we don't do all that well. But the good news is that we can, there are things that we can do to learn resilience. And one of the things is, again, turning to, the importance of relationship in all of this is, forming and maintaining good relationships, actively connecting with people. And I know there's some lawyers who are really into things in the bar, so they're active in bar association activities, changing the law, all things legal, and they have a lot of humans they connect with there, and a lot of but then there are many lawyers who say, I spend my days with a lot of lawyers all the time, and so where I really get the most energy and kind of build up my resilience points is in relationships to others. And it doesn't matter, I mean, but what's important is that you're able to engage with other human beings, and because it's not only the solution to loneliness, it's a solution to a lot of the health concerns that we have. And in fact, not having connection is one of the is actually going to shorten your life. And so having those connections is so important. Finding meaning in what you do, and is, thinking about what is it that brought us to the law in the first place? And am I getting meaning from what it is that I'm doing? And so finding ways to really, figure out, really what charges you up about what you do. If you could do that every single day, what is it that really makes your day as a lawyer, and how can you sort of organize your life, or make sure that you're doing some things that are meaning. And not everybody gets 100% meaning from their jobs. In fact, there's some folks who say, what I do is just kind of what I do. I'm good at it, but that's not really what makes me tick. So being able to know that about yourself and find those other things, being able to sort of revive that meaning and purpose by, in connection with your clients is a wonderful way to do it, but there's other ways too. Authenticity. Who are you? How are you bringing who you are to what you do? Are you just having to kind of show up and be in this mold that other people put you in? Are you able to be yourself? Are there ways that you can make this reflect your needs and who you are? I mean, that's the authenticity. In a firm practice, figuring out, how am I doing this, and are there ways to do this that suit me better? Even if it means, like, what would suit me better is having a 15-minute break, and every day, regardless of whether I feel like I'm out of things to do or not. Another way is just a flexible thinking. So how you react to things is is a source of negativity. If your response to difficult things is that, well, this is going to happen, it's always going to happen, and not find in that challenge a learning piece or something that can help you think about, well, for me, it's sort of like, well, at least I didn't get run over by a car, whatever it was. Thinking about, how you can be flexible, how you can be optimistic. And it's a little bit more than seeing the bright side, but at a minimum, it's knowing that there are different ways that you can approach it, and approaching it in a positive way is going to be more helpful for you in terms of building resilience. And then finding outlets for your stress. So back to the relationship piece. I might as well just pull the slide. The relationship connection, having colleagues that you can talk to who understand what you're going through, is key to building resilience. It also can be the key to avoiding PTSD. And so this slide talks about this.
Judy, we have about 4 minutes to go. So is there anything you want to point out between now and wrapping things up? Because I do want a little bit of time to touch on some LCL services.
You bet. So here's your homework. This is the well-being from the Now What report. And I guess the point there is realize that you have various facets of well-being, and paying attention to them is important. This slide I'll stop for just a second. How you react in community with others makes a difference. To be grateful for gratitude as a practice is something that can help. Supporting others, being that person who can be joy, bring joy to others, protecting yourself by saying no. And then just in your role as a member of the profession, realizing that well-being actually makes not just you a better lawyer, but really improves the profession. And you want to support your colleagues in that practice. So make it okay to not be okay. Be willing to tell your story. Try to reduce the stigma of mental and substance use, and realize that having to ask for help, benefiting from help doesn't mean anything other than that you're a human being and can be helped in relationship with others. All yours, Chase.
All right, thanks, Judy. So I hope you all are familiar with who we are. We are a free and confidential nonprofit, and we offer services and support for Minnesota law students, lawyers, judges, their immediate family members, and also legal support staff as well. So again, we are separate from the bar, and we will not report any misconduct. We will not share information with your employers or family members. We are 100% confidential, and we are the longest consecutively run lawyer assistance program in the country. We have been around for over 47 years now. And on average, we help about 400 new individuals per year, and that's not including someone that we may have been helping for a while. And this is on anything regarding stress, distress, mental health, substance use. Some of the services that we provide are up to 4 free counseling sessions, and that's 4 free counseling sessions per issue. So if you or a family member is looking for counseling services, please give us a call. Next slide, please. We have a network of hundreds of members that serve as peer support, that visit attorneys in treatment centers, that help with CLEs, We have coaching, if maybe you see somebody is having some challenges and you want to get some direction on how to approach them. I facilitate a group for lawyers that are going through disciplinary issues. We have a family support group, we have a weekly AA group, we have a group for lawyers in transition. All of this can be found on our website. But most importantly, if you're just having a tough time and you want to talk to somebody, please call us. Here is our contact information. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today and for everyone's time and attention.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for attending today. I will put the CLE code again into the chat here. We also put the link, the handouts and recording of this presentation will be available soon on the State Law Library website. Thank you very much for your presentation today, Judy and Chase. Very informative. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending. We will go ahead and end the session